The wind howled like a beast as Jake trudged through the endless expanse of sand dunes. The storm had come out of nowhere, turning the arid desert planet into a swirling nightmare of dust and debris. Jake's goggles were scratched, his breathing mask caked with grit, and his navigation system was glitching. He'd been on countless missions, but this storm was unlike anything he had faced. Just a few more clicks to the outpost. He muttered to himself, clutching his survival pack tightly. His voice sounded muffled against the roaring wind. The barren world, known as Zephyr 9, was supposed to be a simple scouting assignment for mineral deposits. No one had mentioned storms like these. As he stumbled forward, a faint glow caught his eye. Jake froze, narrowing his gaze through the sandstorm. At first, he thought it was a mirage or a trick of the light. But then he saw it again, a dim, bluish glow pulsing faintly against the orange haze. He hesitated, his survival instincts telling him to keep moving toward safety. Yet curiosity, that stubborn trait of his, made him veer off course. He approached cautiously, hand resting on the hilt of his plasma cutter. The glow became brighter as he drew closer, illuminating a figure lying half-buried in the sand. Jake's heart skipped a beat. It was a woman, or at least something that looked like one. Her skin shimmered with an ethereal light, patterned with glowing markings that pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Her long silver hair splayed out around her, and her body was wrapped in a tattered metallic fabric that clung to her slender frame. Jake knelt beside her, scanning her condition. She was breathing, but barely. Her skin was icy to the touch, and her markings flickered weakly, as if she were a dying star. "What the hell are you doing out here?" he whispered, knowing full well she couldn't answer. He activated his portable translator, a small device clipped to his belt. "Can you hear me?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. There was no response. Her eyes, a strange shade of violet, fluttered open for a brief moment. She muttered something in a language Jake didn't recognize, her voice soft and melodic. The translator couldn't make sense of it, spitting out garbled text on its display. Jake glanced at the horizon. The storm was intensifying, and visibility was dropping fast. He didn't have time to debate. "All right, you're coming with me," he said, scooping her up in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, almost weightless, but the faint glow of her markings made her feel otherworldly. The trek back to his outpost was brutal. Each step felt like dragging his boots through quicksand. The storm seemed alive, clawing at him with relentless gusts and blinding him with stinging particles. Jake adjusted his grip on the alien woman, shielding her from the worst of the storm. He could feel her shallow breaths against his chest, each one a reminder that she was hanging on by a thread. His outpost finally came into view, a squat metal structure half buried in the dunes. Jake practically staggered inside, kicking the door shut behind him. The sudden silence was deafening. He laid the woman on a cot, quickly activating the outpost's environmental stabilizers. Warm air flooded the room, chasing away the chill of the storm. Jake grabbed his medical scanner and began examining her. The device beeped and whirred, displaying a flood of incomprehensible data. She wasn't human. Of that, there was no doubt. Her biology was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her pulse was faint, and the glowing patterns on her skin flickered erratically. "Great," Jake muttered, running a hand through his sandy hair. "What am I supposed to do now?" The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open again. This time, she managed to focus on him. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Jake grabbed a water flask and gently lifted her head, helping her take a sip. She drank greedily, some of the color returning to her face. Her markings glowed a little brighter, though they were still dim. She spoke again, her voice barely audible. The translator beeped, managing to catch a fragment of her words. "Hunters. Coming." Jake frowned. "Hunters? Who's coming? Are you in danger?" Her eyes widened slightly, and she gripped his arm with surprising strength. The translator buzzed, struggling to translate her frantic words. "Hide. Run. They'll..." Find me. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Whoever, or whatever, she was running from sounded bad. And now, by saving her, he had likely put himself in their crosshairs. The outpost's proximity alarm blared suddenly, jolting Jake to his feet. He rushed to the console, his heart pounding. Through the haze of the storm, the sensors picked up movement, several figures closing in on his location. Jake glanced back at the alien woman, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and determination. He grabbed his plasma cutter and took a deep breath. Well, looks like you weren't kidding about the hunters. The storm outside raged on, but inside the outpost, a new storm was brewing. Jake knew this was just the beginning. The outpost was eerily quiet after the alarm subsided, as though the storm itself had paused to watch what would happen next. Jake paced the small room, glancing between the flickering sensor screen and the mysterious woman lying on his cot. Her breathing was steady now, her bluish markings glowing faintly in the dim light of the outpost. He had patched up alien creatures before, but this was something entirely different. Jake knelt beside her, examining the intricate patterns on her skin. They moved, slowly, like rivers of light flowing under her flesh. He muttered to himself, "What are you, and why are you glowing like that?" Just as the words left his mouth, the woman stirred, her body tensed as though bracing for something. Her violet eyes snapped open, glowing faintly in the dim room. For a moment, she looked directly at Jake, and he felt an inexplicable pull, as if her gaze was reaching into the deepest parts of his mind. "Hey, take it easy," Jake said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. His voice was calm but carried a slight edge. He had no idea what she was capable of. She struggled to sit up, her movements sluggish but deliberate. When she spoke, her voice was a haunting melody, each word tinged with desperation. "Karin, Zemarch, Seresh." The translator on Jake's belt beeped and whirred, spitting out fragments. "Danger, light fades, cannot run." Jake frowned. "Light fades. What does that mean? You're not making much sense." Her eyes darted around the room, taking in her surroundings. Her breathing quickened as though panic was setting in. She clutched at her chest, where her markings glowed erratically, flickering like a dying flame. Jake grabbed the translator and held it closer to her. "Listen, you're safe here. Just tell me who you are. What's happening?" The woman focused on him again, her expression softening slightly. She pointed weakly to herself. "Erin," she said, her voice clear enough for Jake to catch without the translator. "Erin," Jake repeated, nodding. "Okay. Erin. I'm Jake. You're in my outpost. You where?" He hesitated, not knowing how much she'd remember. "You were in bad shape out there. I brought you in." Erin tilted her head as if trying to understand, then gestured toward the sensor console. "Hunters," she said, the translator finally catching up. "They follow. Danger. Must. Hide." The mention of hunters sent a chill through Jake. He glanced at the console. The figures he'd seen earlier had vanished, likely lost in the chaos of the storm. But he knew better than to let his guard down. "Who are these hunters? Why are they after you?" Erin hesitated, her glowing markings dimming again. She looked down at her hands, as though ashamed. "I am." She paused, struggling to find the words. The translator filled the silence. "Royal. Blood. Fleeing. They want my life to claim throne." Jake blinked. "Royal blood. You're some kind of princess." Erin nodded weakly, though her expression was pained. "Not princess. Hair." She clutched her chest again, her markings dimming further. "My life, my light, fades. Without bond, I die." Jake's mind raced. None of this was making sense, but he couldn't deny the urgency in her words. "What do you mean, bond? What kind of bond?" Erin tried to speak, but collapsed back onto the cot, her strength failing. Her markings flickered dangerously low. Jake swore under his breath, grabbing a med kit and scanning her vitals again. Her pulse was erratic, and the data on the screen made no sense. Symbols he couldn't decipher flashing in warning. "Damn it," Jake muttered. He placed a hand on her shoulder, shaking her gently. "Stay with me, Erin. Don't give up on me now." She opened her eyes just a sliver, whispering something barely audible. Jake leaned closer, catching the words as the translator buzzed faintly. "Bond, soul, only way to survive." Before Jake could process her cryptic message, the proximity alarms blared again. This time, the signal was stronger, closer. He spun around to the console, his stomach sinking as he saw multiple heat signatures moving toward the outpost. They were fast, coordinated. "Hunters," Jake said under his breath, grabbing his plasma cutter and powering up the outpost's defenses. The shields wouldn't hold forever, but they might buy him time. Behind him, Erin stirred again. Her voice was hoarse but urgent. "They come. Must. Choose." "Choose what?" Jake asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "You're not giving me much to work with here." Erin reached out, her hand trembling as it brushed against his. A sudden warmth surged through Jake's body, and for a brief moment, he felt something. Her fear, her desperation, her fading strength. It was as if their minds had touched. He pulled back, shaken. What the hell was that? Erin's markings glowed faintly once more, but her strength was nearly gone. She looked at him with pleading eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Save me, or I die. Bond, or leave." The alarm screamed louder, and the outpost shook as something heavy struck the outer walls. Jake clenched his fists, torn between survival and the strange responsibility that had fallen into his lap. Outside, the storm roared, hiding the hunters but not their intent. Inside, Erin lay dying, her life literally fading before his eyes. Jake made his decision. The outpost trembled as another impact rocked its reinforced walls. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, and the flickering overhead lights cast eerie shadows across the small space. Jake gripped his plasma cutter tightly, his knuckles white, as he stared at the readouts on the console. The hunters were here, and there was no way out. Erin lay motionless on the cot, her glowing markings dim and uneven. Each flicker seemed weaker than the last, like the final moments of a dying ember. Jake glanced back at her, his heart pounding. He didn't know her well, didn't even know her species, but something deep inside told him he couldn't abandon her. Not now. The proximity alarm let out another shrill beep, and the scanner updated with more detail. 4 heat signatures, all converging on the outpost. Jake swore under his breath. They were too well coordinated to be random scavengers. Whoever these hunters were, they were professionals. "Erin," he called, his voice sharp but low. He needed her awake. Needed answers. "If you can hear me, I need you to tell me what I'm dealing with. What are these hunters? What do they want?" Erin stirred, her eyes barely opening. She looked at him, her gaze filled with a mix of fear and exhaustion. "Hunters, mercenaries," she whispered, her voice so faint the translator barely picked it up. "Sent to claim me." Jake crouched beside her, trying to piece it together. "Claim you for what? You said you're some kind of heir. Is this about power? The throne?" She nodded weakly, but her response was more chilling than he expected. "My life is the key. They take my essence, my light, to fuel their rise." Jake stared at her, his mind racing. This wasn't just some bounty hunt. These hunters were after something far more sinister. "You mean they're trying to kill you, or use you?" Erin struggled to sit up, clutching her chest as her markings flickered again. "Both," she said, her voice breaking. "My kind, our life force, it is power. To take it is to kill me." The outpost shook again, this time with a heavier impact. Jake's sensors blared a warning. The hunters were deploying cutting tools to breach the walls. He jumped to his feet, activating the outpost's automated defenses. Turrets whirred to life, their targeting systems locking onto the heat signatures outside. "You're not making this easy, Aaron," Jake muttered as he armed himself with extra plasma cartridges. "But I'm not letting them take you. Not while I'm still breathing." Aaron reached out weakly, her hand brushing against his. Jake felt that same strange warmth he had before, a connection that went deeper than touch. Her voice, though faint, carried a weight that made him pause. "You must bond with me. Only then can I fight." Jake's brow furrowed. "Bond? You keep saying that. What does it even mean? You're asking me to sign up for something I don't understand." She closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering the last reserves of her strength. "My people, we bond our life force to another. It sustains us, strengthens us. Without it, I die. But with it, we share power. We survive." Another tremor shook the outpost, and Jake's console blared a warning. One of the outer walls was weakening. The hunters would be inside in minutes. He turned back to Aaron, frustration and fear mixing in his voice. "And what happens to me if we do this? You're asking me to gamble with my life for someone I just met." Aaron opened her eyes, her gaze steady despite her fragile state. "You will be changed, but you will live. Together, we can fight. Alone, we die." Jake ran a hand through his hair, glancing between her and the console. The hunters were relentless. He could already hear the faint hum of their tools cutting through the metal walls. Time was running out. He sighed, his grip tightening on his plasma cutter. "Fine," he said, kneeling beside her. "Tell me what I need to do." Aaron's markings glowed slightly brighter, a faint smile crossing her lips. "Place your hand on mine. Trust me." Jake hesitated for only a moment before doing as she said. As his hand met hers, a surge of energy coursed through him. It was overwhelming, hot and cold at once, like standing in the heart of a storm. The glow from her markings spread to him, etching faint patterns along his own skin. For a moment, he felt everything: her pain, her fear, her determination. The bond was formed. Aaron sat up suddenly, her strength returning in an instant. Her markings flared to life, casting the room in a bright, bluish glow. Jake staggered back, his body buzzing with newfound energy. He didn't understand it, but he felt stronger, faster, more alive than ever before. The outer wall finally gave way, and the hunters burst into the outpost. They were tall, armored figures with glowing visors and weapons that hummed with deadly energy. One of them barked an order in a guttural language. Aaron stood beside Jake now, her presence commanding. "Stay close," she said, her voice steadier than before. "We fight together." Jake raised his plasma cutter, a new confidence surging through him. The hunters had no idea what they were walking into. The storm outside raged on, but inside, a battle was about to begin, one that would change everything. The air inside the outpost crackled with tension as the first hunter stepped through the breached wall, his silhouette sharp and menacing against the stormy backdrop. Jake tightened his grip on the plasma cutter, his body humming with the strange energy from the bond he'd just formed with Aaron. He could feel her presence beside him, a calming yet electrifying force. Her markings glowed brightly now, casting faint shadows on the metallic walls. The hunters were unlike anything Jake had encountered before. They moved with precision, their armored suits reflecting the faint blue light from Aaron's glowing skin. Their weapons buzzed ominously, energy rippling across their surfaces. These weren't ordinary bounty hunters. They were trained killers, and their focus was entirely on Aaron. Jake's mind raced. The bond had done something to him. He felt stronger, faster, and more aware of his surroundings. It was as if Aaron's energy had fused with his own, sharpening his senses. But it wasn't just physical. He could feel her emotions, a mix of fear, determination, and something else he couldn't quite name. "Jake," Aaron whispered, her voice steady but low. "You must trust me now. There's strength. It comes from fear. They will try to divide us. Jake glanced at her, his heart pounding. Divide us? What does that mean? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, her glowing markings shifting like flowing rivers. Her voice rang out, clear and strong. You seek me, hunters, but you do not understand what you face. The lead hunter, a towering figure with a scared helmet, stepped closer. His voice boomed through a translator device strapped to his chest. We understand enough. Surrender now, or your new companion will suffer. Jake's blood ran cold at the threat. He raised his plasma cutter, his finger hovering over the trigger. You'll have to get through me first, he growled. The hunter tilted his head, his visor scanning Jake. You bonded with her. His tone was almost amused, though laced with menace. Do you even know what you've done, human? Do you understand the price you've paid? Jake hesitated, glancing at Erin. Her face betrayed no fear, only resolve. Whatever the price is, he said, stepping closer, I'll deal with it. But you're not taking her. The hunter let out a harsh laugh, signaling to his comrades. Then you die with her. The fight began without warning. The hunters moved as one, their weapons firing bursts of concentrated energy. Jake dove for cover, his enhanced reflexes saving him from a blast that melted part of the wall behind him. Erin moved with unnatural speed, her glowing form weaving between the hunters like a phantom. Her hands crackled with energy, sending out pulses that disoriented the attackers. Jake popped up from behind a console, firing his plasma cutter at the nearest hunter. The shot struck true, knocking the attacker back. But their armor was resilient, and the hunter recovered quickly, returning fire. Jake barely had time to duck before the energy bolt sizzled past his head. Erin, he shouted, his voice strained. What's the plan here? We can't hold them off forever. Erin darted behind him, her glowing hand pressing against his shoulder. The contact sent a surge of energy through him, and suddenly he felt her thoughts in his mind. We fight together. Trust your instincts. They are mine now, too. It was overwhelming, but Jake didn't have time to question it. He felt his movements align with hers, their actions synchronized as if they were two parts of the same whole. When a hunter lunged at him, he sidestepped perfectly, Erin striking the attacker with a blast of energy that sent him sprawling. But the hunters weren't just brutes. They adapted quickly, flanking Jake and Erin with precision. The lead hunter barked commands in his guttural language, and the others formed a tight formation, cutting off their escape. Jake's mind raced as he fired another shot, this time striking a weak point in one of the hunter's armor. The attacker fell, sparks flying from his suit. But for every one they disabled, another seemed to take their place. Erin, this isn't working. Jake yelled, frustration mounting. We need another option. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then turned to him, her markings glowing brighter than ever. There is one way, but you may not survive. Jake froze, her words sinking in. What do you mean? What are you talking about? Erin's expression was unreadable, but her voice was steady. The bond we share, it can be deepened. My energy, my essence, will flow through you completely, but your human body may not withstand it. The lead hunter approached, his weapon humming ominously. Surrender her now, he growled. This is your last chance, human. Jake glanced between Erin and the advancing hunters. He felt her fear, her pain, and her hope all at once. The bond they shared wasn't just about survival, it was about trust. She had placed her life in his hands, and now it was his turn to do the same. He made his decision. Do it, he said, his voice firm. Whatever it takes, do it. Erin didn't hesitate. She placed both hands on his chest, and a surge of energy exploded between them. Jake screamed as the power coursed through him, his body burning with an intensity he couldn't describe. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse. But then it stabilized. He stood taller, stronger, the glowing patterns from Erin's skin now etched across his own. He felt her strength within him, guiding his every move. The hunters paused, visibly startled by the transformation. Jake turned to face them, his plasma cutter glowing with the same energy that now flowed through him. He grinned, the fear in his chest replaced by something new: power. "Your move," he said, his voice laced with defiance. And then the battle truly began. The room was bathed in a pulsing glow, a mix of Aaron's ethereal light and the strange patterns now etched across Jake's skin. The air itself seemed charged with energy, crackling faintly as the two stood side by side. Jake could feel the power surging through him, not just in his body, but in his mind. It was as if his thoughts and instincts had merged with Aaron's. Every move felt natural, fluid, as though they were one being moving in harmony. The hunters hesitated, their weapons lowered slightly as they assessed this unexpected development. The lead hunter tilted his head, his visor scanning Jake. His voice broke the tense silence, dripping with disdain. "You've bonded with her fully. Do you even know what you've become, human? You've sealed your fate." Jake smirked, raising his plasma cutter. "You're not the first to tell me that. But I've got news for you. I'm not going down without a fight." Without another word, the lead hunter signaled his squad, and the room erupted into chaos. The hunters charged, their weapons firing bursts of energy that crackled through the air. Jake didn't flinch. He moved with precision, dodging the blasts with a speed that surprised even him. His plasma cutter hummed as he returned fire, each shot landing with deadly accuracy. Aaron was a blur of motion beside him, her hands glowing as she sent pulses of raw energy toward the attackers. One hunter collapsed as her strike tore through his armor, the intricate technology shorting out in a shower of sparks. Another swung a blade at her, but she sidestepped gracefully, her movements almost otherworldly. Jake's newfound abilities weren't just physical. He could sense the hunters' intentions before they acted, as though their moves were being whispered to him by Aaron's mind. When one tried to flank him, Jake was already turning, firing a precise shot that struck the hunter's weapon, rendering it useless. The battle was fierce, but the bond gave Jake and Aaron an undeniable edge. Still, the hunters were relentless, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm them. Jake's chest heaved as he ducked behind a console, glancing at Aaron. "Got any more tricks up your sleeve?" he called out. Aaron nodded, her markings glowing even brighter. "The bond amplifies our power, but it also draws from your strength. Are you ready to push yourself further?" Jake wiped sweat from his brow, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Do I have a choice?" Aaron stepped closer, her hand brushing against his arm. The contact sent a surge of energy through him, reinvigorating his tired muscles. "Together, we are stronger," she said, "but it will come at a cost." Jake didn't ask what the cost was. He didn't need to. In that moment, he felt the connection between them deepen. It wasn't just energy they shared. It was trust, willpower, and determination. For the first time, Jake truly understood what the bond meant. It wasn't just a survival mechanism. It was a merging of souls. With renewed strength, Jake leaped from his cover, charging straight into the fray. The hunters seemed caught off guard by his boldness, their formation breaking as he fought with a ferocity that was almost inhuman. Every strike, every shot felt like second nature, as if Aaron's instincts were guiding him. The lead hunter growled in frustration, his weapon glowing brighter as he aimed it directly at Jake. "You think this changes anything? You're still outnumbered." But before he could fire, Aaron intervened. She raised both hands, and a pulse of blinding light erupted from her markings, filling the room. The hunters cried out, their visors overloaded by the sudden brightness. Jake shielded his eyes, but through the bond, he could sense what Aaron was doing. When the light faded, the hunters were disoriented, their movements sluggish. Jake didn't waste the opportunity. He moved quickly, disabling one hunter after another with precise shots and strikes. Aaron focused her energy on the lead hunter, her glowing hands forming an almost tangible barrier that pushed him back. The lead hunter snarled, his voice laced with frustration. You may have won this battle, but you cannot escape us. The galaxy is vast, but our reach is greater." Jake stepped forward. His plasma cutter pointed directly at the hunter's chest. "Then tell your bosses to find me. I'll be waiting." With a final surge of energy, Aaron unleashed a blast that sent the lead hunter flying backward. His armor sparked and sputtered as he hit the ground, struggling to stand. Realizing they were outmatched, the remaining hunters retreated, dragging their wounded leader with them. The outpost fell silent, save for the faint hum of Aaron's energy and Jake's heavy breathing. Jake leaned against a console, wiping blood from a cut on his forehead. "Well, that was fun," he said, his voice laced with exhaustion. Aaron approached him, her expression soft but serious. "The bond saved us," she said, "but it is not without consequences. Your life, it is no longer entirely your own." Jake looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "Yeah, I figured that much. But you're alive, and we're both still standing. That's what matters, right?" She nodded, though her gaze was distant, as if she were already anticipating the battles yet to come. "For now, yes. But this is only the beginning. The hunters will return, and they will bring greater forces. They will not stop until I am taken, or until we stop them." Jake straightened, a faint grin tugging at his lips despite the tension. "Well then," he said, slinging the plasma cutter over his shoulder, "I guess we got some work to do." Aaron smiled faintly, the light in her markings softening. "Together," she said, "we will endure." Outside, the storm began to subside, the winds dying down as if the planet itself had been holding its breath. But Jake knew the calm wouldn't last. The real storm was still out there, waiting for them, and he was ready for it. The aftermath of the battle hung heavy in the air. Smoke curled from damaged consoles, and the acrid scent of scorched metal filled the small outpost. Jake paced back and forth, his boots crunching against broken fragments of armor and shattered equipment. He could still feel the energy coursing through him, a faint hum beneath his skin, but it was tempered now, like a storm settling after its fiercest gusts. Aaron sat on the edge of the cot, her glow dimmed but steady. Her expression was distant, her violet eyes fixed on the floor as if she were lost in thought. The markings on her skin pulsed gently, a rhythm that Jake could now feel within himself. It was strange, unsettling even, to realize how deeply they were connected. Jake leaned against a console, his arms crossed. "All right, Aaron. We survived the hunters, but something tells me this isn't over. So it's time you tell me everything. No more half-truths. No more cryptic warnings." She looked up at him, her face unreadable. For a long moment, she didn't speak, as though weighing whether he could handle the truth. Finally, she nodded, her voice soft but steady. "You deserve to know." Jake straightened, the seriousness in her tone sending a chill through him. "I'm listening." Aaron gestured to the faintly glowing markings on her skin. "My people are known as the Illindari. We are not like humans. Our life force, what you might call our soul, is tied to the light within us. It is both our strength and our curse." Jake frowned, leaning closer. "What do you mean, curse?" She hesitated, her fingers tracing one of the glowing lines on her arm. "Our light is coveted. It is a source of immense power, capable of fueling technologies beyond your imagination. But to harness it, we must die." Jake's jaw tightened. "So the hunters. They were sent by those who seek to exploit our light," she interrupted, her voice hardening. "They care nothing for our lives, only for what we can give them. I am the last of my lineage, the heir to the Illindari throne. If they take me, they gain not only my light, but the power to rule over my people." Jake let out a slow breath, his mind reeling. "And the bond. What you did to me. What we share now." Aaron met his gaze, her expression softening. "The bond was a desperate choice. Without it, I would have died, my light fading into nothingness. But the bond is not just a connection. It is emerging. My light now flows through you, Jake. You carry a part of me, just as I carry a part of you." He stared at her, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy blanket. "So, what does that mean for me? For us?" "It means you are no longer entirely human," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "Your body has been altered, your life force entwined with mine. You may begin to notice changes, enhanced senses, greater strength, a heightened awareness of the world around you. But there is a cost." Jake arched a brow, his voice edged with frustration. "What kind of cost, Aaron? You keep saying that, but you're not giving me answers." She stood, her movements graceful yet hesitant. "The bond is permanent, Jake. As long as we are connected, our lives are tied together. If I am harmed, you will feel it. If I die, you may not survive." The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the faint hum of the outpost systems. Jake turned away, running a hand through his hair. "So what you're saying is, I've signed up for a lifetime of running from hunters and hoping I don't get killed because of some alien royal drama." Erin stepped closer, her voice softer now. "I know this is not what you wanted. I did not choose this lightly. But the bond has given us both a chance to fight back. Together, we are stronger." Jake turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "But what happens if we win, Aaron? If we stop the hunters, if we take down whoever's after you, what happens to me? Do I just stay like this?" She hesitated, and for the first time, Jake saw uncertainty in her gaze. "I do not know," she admitted. "The bond is rare, even among my people. Few have survived it, and fewer still have found peace. But I promise you this, I will do everything in my power to protect you, as you have protected me." Jake let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Protect me, Aaron. I'm the one who saved you." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "And I will spend the rest of my life repaying that debt." Before Jake could respond, the proximity alarm blared again, shattering the quiet moment. He spun toward the console, his stomach sinking as the sensors lit up with new signals. But this time, it wasn't a small group. A fleet of ships had entered the atmosphere, their heat signatures unmistakable. Jake swore under his breath. "Looks like your friends brought backup." Erin's face hardened, her markings glowing brighter. "They will not stop until they have me." Jake grabbed his plasma cutter, his voice steady despite the growing dread in his chest. "Then we make sure they don't." As the outpost trembled with the sound of approaching ships, Jake and Aaron stood side by side, their bond pulsing with shared resolve. The battle wasn't over, and the stakes had never been higher. But for the first time, Jake felt a strange sense of purpose. Whatever came next, he wasn't facing it alone. The sound of engines roared outside, a low, guttural hum that sent vibrations through the outpost walls. Jake's gaze flicked to the console, where the sensor screen lit up with a dozen incoming ships. The lead vessel hovered ominously above the outpost, its dark silhouette cutting through the dissipating storm. Spotlights pierced the gloom, their beams scanning the sands like the eyes of a predator. Jake tightened his grip on the plasma cutter. The bond with Aaron still buzzed faintly in his chest, a constant reminder of their connection. He glanced at her, standing beside him with a calm that belied the chaos closing in. Her markings glowed brighter than ever, casting intricate patterns of light across the walls. "We're outnumbered," Jake muttered, his voice laced with frustration. "This isn't a fight we can win." Aaron turned to him, her violet eyes steady. "Not with weapons," she agreed. "But strength comes in many forms, Jake. And sometimes it is not about winning. It is about enduring." He let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. "You've got away with words, Aaron, but I'm not sure philosophy is going to help us right now." The proximity alarm screamed again, cutting through their conversation. The ships were landing now, their heavy doors hissing open as armored hunters disembarked. Jake watched the feed on the console. This wasn't just a squad, it was an army. He could see them moving in tight formations, weapons at the ready, their glowing visors slicing through the fading storm. Erin stepped closer, her voice lowering. Jake, there is something you must know. The bond. It is more than just survival. It is a union of our lives, our fates, but it also gives us a choice. Jake frowned, glancing at her. A choice? What kind of choice? Her markings dimmed slightly, as though the weight of her words were reflected in her light. I can release you, she said quietly. I can break the bond, return your life to what it was before. You would be free to walk away. For a moment, the words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Jake's mind raced. He could walk away. Go back to being just another human explorer, drifting from job to job, free of this strange alien responsibility. The thought was tempting, so tempting it made his chest ache. But then he looked at Erin. The glow of her markings, the quiet strength in her gaze, the way her presence had become a part of him. The bond wasn't just a connection, it was a promise. To protect her, to fight beside her, to share whatever came next. And what happens to you if I walk away? He asked, already knowing the answer. Erin's expression didn't falter. Without the bond, I will fade. The hunters will take me, and my light will be extinguished. Jake clenched his fists, his heart pounding. Then it's not really a choice, is it? It is, she said softly. Because your life matters, Jake. You have already given so much. I cannot ask for more. The sound of heavy boots echoed outside, drawing closer. Jake glanced at the door, then back at Erin. You didn't ask for this, he said. Neither did I. But we're here now, and I'm not walking away. If we go down together. Erin's markings brightened, her violet eyes shimmering with unspoken gratitude. Then we fight as one. The first explosion shook the outpost, a blast that sent debris flying and rattled the walls. The hunters were making their move, their heavy artillery tearing through the defenses. Jake braced himself, his plasma cutter humming with energy. Erin raised her hands, a sphere of light forming between them. The door gave way, and the hunters poured in like a tide of darkness. Jake didn't hesitate. He moved with the grace and precision that the bond had given him, his plasma cutter firing shot after shot. Each blast found its mark, but the hunters were relentless, their sheer numbers overwhelming. Beside him, Erin unleashed her energy, waves of light cascading across the room. The hunters recoiled, their armor sparking as the energy disrupted their systems. But for every one they disabled, another took its place. This isn't working, Jake shouted, his voice strained. We're getting swarmed. Erin didn't respond immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes, her markings glowing brighter than ever. Jake felt a surge of energy course through him, stronger than anything he'd felt before. It was as if she were pouring everything into him, her light fusing with his own. Erin, what are you doing? He demanded, panic rising in his chest. Her voice was calm, even as her strength began to falter. The bond is our power, Jake, but it is also my gift to you. My light, my life. It is yours now. No, Jake shouted, grabbing her arm. We're in this together. You can't just. A deafening explosion interrupted him, and the room filled with blinding light. Jake felt himself lifted off the ground, the bond between them flaring like a supernova. When the light faded, the hunters were gone, their ships retreating into the sky. The outpost was in ruins, but Jake was alive. He turned to Erin, his heart sinking. She was on the ground, her markings dim and fading. Erin, he cried, dropping to his knees beside her. She looked up at him, a faint smile on her lips. You are stronger than you know, Jake, she whispered. The bond, it will sustain you. Live, for both of us. And then her light went out. Jake sat there, cradling her lifeless form as the winds outside howled once more. He could still feel her presence within him. The bond a faint hum in his chest. She was gone, but she wasn't. Her sacrifice had saved him, and her light would live on in him. As the sun rose over the desolate horizon, Jake stood, his resolve hardening. The fight wasn't over. The hunters would return, and he would be ready. For her. For them both.